On a freezing autumn morning, a solitary Hells Angels biker rides through quiet countryside, his heart heavy with years of regret and loss. When he spots an old woman struggling to carry firewood outside her worn-down home, he stops without thinking. What begins as a simple act of kindness turns into a life-changing friendship. Through shared meals, laughter, and memories of pain and resilience, the old woman reminds the biker of the goodness still left in the world and of the man he once was before the road hardened him. What follows is a story of compassion that touches an entire town and proves that even the toughest hearts can still do the gentlest deeds. But what secret from her past made this gentle woman so understanding of his troubled soul? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Harley-Davidson's engine rumbled to silence as Marcus "Tank" Morrison pulled off the narrow country road. At 52, his weathered hands gripped the handlebars with the practiced ease of a man who had spent more years on two wheels than most people spend in careers. The worn leather of his Hells Angels vest creased as he dismounted, the patches and insignia telling stories he preferred to keep buried. The October wind cut sharp through the Montana countryside, carrying the scent of dying leaves and distant wood smoke. Marcus had been riding for 3 days straight, moving from town to town with no particular destination in mind. Running, though he would never admit it to himself. Running from memories that chased him like ghosts on the highway. Across the gravel driveway, an elderly woman struggled with an armload of split oak logs. Eleanor Whitfield, though Marcus didn't know her name yet, moved with the careful determination of someone whose body had begun betraying her spirit. At 73, she had lived in this farmhouse for 47 years, watching the seasons change from her kitchen window and tending a garden that had fed 3 children and countless neighborhood strays. Her grey hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and despite the cold, she wore only a thin cardigan over her house dress. Each piece of firewood seemed to weigh more than the last as she made her slow progress toward the front porch. The walking stick leaning against the woodpile bore intricate carvings of vines and flowers, evidence of hands that had once been steadier, more certain. Marcus watched her for a long moment, his conscience warring with decades of learned cynicism. In his world, stopping meant getting involved, and getting involved meant complications. The smart play was to fire up the bike and disappear down the road like he always did. But something about the woman's quiet struggle tugged at a part of him he thought had died years ago. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice rougher than he intended. "You need some help with that wood?" Eleanor straightened, one hand pressed to her lower back. She studied him with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing, taking in the leather vest, the graying beard, the hard lines around his eyes that spoke of violence and loss. Most people her age would have hurried inside and locked the door. Instead, she smiled. "That's very kind of you, young man," she said, and Marcus almost laughed at being called young. "I'm afraid I bit off more than I can chew today." He crossed the yard in long strides, his boots crunching on fallen leaves. Up close, he could see the arthritis in her hands, the way she favored her left leg. The firewood was stacked haphazardly in her arms, ready to tumble at any moment. "Let me take that," Marcus said, his tone gentler now. He carefully transferred the logs from her arms to his, noting how she immediately straightened with relief. "Where do you want these?" "Just inside the front door would be wonderful," Eleanor said. "There's a wood box right by the hearth." Marcus nodded and carried the logs up the creaking porch steps. Through the open door, he caught glimpses of a life well lived. Family photographs covering the mantel, handmade quilts draped over furniture, the lingering scent of fresh-baked bread. It was the kind of home he had never known, warm and settled and permanent. He stacked the wood neatly in the iron box beside the stone fireplace, aware of Eleanor watching him from the doorway. When he turned back, she was studying him with the same quiet intensity she might give to a puzzle she was trying to solve. "Thank you," she said simply. I don't get many visitors out here, especially ones willing to lend a hand. Marcus shrugged, suddenly uncomfortable with her gratitude. No trouble. He started toward his bike, but Eleanor's voice stopped him. I got coffee on the stove, an apple pie cooling on the counter. My grandmother's recipe. You're welcome to stay for a piece, if you have time. The offer caught him off guard. When was the last time someone had invited him to share a meal without wanting something in return? Marcus looked back at the woman, seeing something in her expression that he couldn't quite name. Not pity, not fear, just simple human kindness offered without conditions. I don't want to impose, he said, though part of him was already imagining the warmth of her kitchen, the comfort of conversation that didn't involve club business or territorial disputes. No imposition at all, Eleanor assured him. I made the whole pie, and there's only me to eat it. Seems a shame to let it go to waste. Marcus hesitated, his hand resting on the Harley's seat. Every instinct told him to decline, to maintain the distance he had carefully built between himself and the rest of the world. But the afternoon was growing cold, and he had nowhere pressing to be. And something about this woman made him want to remember what it felt like to be treated like a human being instead of a threat. All right, he said finally, just for a few minutes. Eleanor's kitchen was everything Marcus had imagined from the doorway and more. Copper pots hung from hooks above a well-worn butcher block, and mason jars filled with dried herbs lined open shelves. The wood-burning stove radiated warmth that seemed to seep into his bones, chasing away the chill of 3 days on the road. She moved through the space with practiced efficiency, despite her obvious discomfort, pulling down ceramic mugs and cutting generous slices of pie that made Marcus's mouth water. The apple filling was still warm, steam rising from the golden crust as she set a plate before him at the small oak table. Cream or sugar? Eleanor asked, pouring coffee from a blue enamel pot that looked older than Marcus himself. Black's fine, he said, wrapping his hands around the mug's warmth. The coffee was strong and rich, nothing like the bitter swill he usually grabbed at truck stops. This is real good coffee, ma'am. Eleanor, she corrected gently, settling into the chair across from him with her own cup. And thank you. I grind the beans myself every morning. Old habits. Marcus took a bite of the pie and had to suppress a groan of pleasure. The apples were perfectly tender, the spices balanced just right, the crust flaky and buttery. This is incredible. You make this from scratch? Eleanor's eyes crinkled with pleasure at the compliment. My mother's recipe. She taught me when I was barely tall enough to see over the counter. Said a woman who couldn't make a proper pie wasn't much of a cook. She paused, studying his face. You look like a man who's been living off diner food for a while. Marcus found himself smiling despite his usual guardedness. Guilty as charged. Been on the road for a few days. Your cooking beats anything I've had in weeks. Where are you headed? Eleanor asked, the question casual but interested. North, maybe, or west. Haven't decided yet. Marcus realized how aimless that sounded and added, just seeing the country. Eleanor nodded, as if this made perfect sense. On the wall behind her, Marcus noticed a collection of family photographs in mismatched frames. Wedding pictures, graduation photos, children at various ages grinning gap-toothed at the camera. A life measured in moments and milestones. You have family? He asked, nodding toward the pictures. Eleanor's expression softened. 3 children, all grown and scattered to the winds. Jenny's in Seattle, runs a bookstore. Paul teaches at a college in Vermont. And David, she paused, her fingers tightening slightly around her coffee cup. David was my youngest. He passed away 20 years ago. I'm sorry, Marcus said, and meant it. He knew the weight of loss, carried his own collection of ghosts. He was 22, Eleanor continued, her voice steady but distant, full of dreams and plans. Sometimes I still catch myself setting 4 places at the table instead of 1. Marcus found himself thinking of his own daughter, Sarah, who would be 28 now. When was the last time he had spoken to her? 3 years, 4? The pain of that estrangement was a constant ache he had learned to live with, like an old injury that flared up in bad weather. You have children? Eleanor asked, as if reading his thoughts. A daughter, Marcus admitted. Sarah. Haven't seen her in a while. Eleanor waited, but when he didn't elaborate, she simply nodded. Children have a way of breaking our hearts and mending them all at once. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the occasional settling of the old house. Marcus found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in months, maybe years. There was something about Eleanor's presence that made him want to lower his defenses, to remember what it felt like to be just a man instead of a reputation with a motorcycle. You're not from around here, Eleanor observed, refilling his coffee cup, California originally. Been riding through the Northwest. He gestured vaguely toward the window. Pretty country up here, peaceful. It is that, Eleanor agreed. Robert and I moved here in 1978. He was a carpenter, said he wanted to build us a life where we could see the stars at night and know our neighbors' names. Robert was your husband? 45 years, Eleanor said, touching the thin gold band she still wore. He's been gone 3 years now. Heart attack while he was working in the garden. The doctors said he didn't suffer, but I still talk to him sometimes. Tell him about the tomatoes, or ask his opinion on whether to replant the rose bushes. Marcus understood that kind of solitude, though his came from choice rather than loss. Must get lonely out here by yourself. Eleanor considered this. Sometimes, but lonely and alone aren't always the same thing. I've got my books, my garden, the memories, and occasionally a kind stranger stops by to help an old woman with her firewood. She smiled at him then, and Marcus felt something shift in his chest, some long-frozen part of himself beginning to thaw. Marcus hadn't planned to return to Eleanor's farmhouse the next morning, but he found himself slowing his Harley as he passed her driveway. Through the kitchen window, he could see her moving carefully around the stove, and something pulled him to turn in. She looked up as his boots sounded on the porch steps, her face lighting up with genuine pleasure. Well, look who's back. Perfect timing. I just put a fresh pot of coffee on. I was just passing by, Marcus said, though they both knew the gravel road led nowhere but her house. Thought I'd check and see if you needed anything. Eleanor's knowing smile said she saw right through his casual explanation, but she didn't call him on it. As a matter of fact, I could use help reaching something from the top shelf in the pantry. These old bones don't stretch like they used to. Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon and fresh bread. Eleanor handed him a stepladder and pointed to a dusty mason jar on the highest shelf. As Marcus retrieved it, he noticed his hands were steadier than they'd been in months. The constant tremor that came from too many years of hard living had quieted in this peaceful place. Thank you, dear, Eleanor said, accepting the jar. Robert always kept the good preserves up there. Said it would make me appreciate them more if I had to work for them. They settled at the kitchen table, with coffee and thick slices of the bread Eleanor had pulled from the oven. On the windowsill, Marcus noticed a thin gold wedding band sitting in a small ceramic dish, worn smooth from decades of wear. You still miss him, Marcus observed. Nodding toward the ring, Eleanor followed his gaze and smiled sadly. Every day, but missing someone and being grateful for the time you had with them can exist together. Robert used to say that love doesn't end just because breathing does. Marcus thought of the people he'd lost over the years. Brothers in the club who died in crashes or violence. Friends who'd overdosed or been killed in prison. He'd never allowed himself to mourn them properly, had always pushed the grief down and moved forward. It seemed like weakness then, but watching Eleanor's gentle acceptance of her loss, he wondered if he'd been wrong. 45 years is a long time, he said. Not long enough, Eleanor replied, but we made the most of what we had. 3 children, this house, a garden that fed half the county some summers. Robert built furniture that's still being passed down through families in town. We left something good behind. She poured herself more coffee, her movements deliberate and thoughtful. What about you, Marcus? What do you want to leave behind? The question caught him off guard. In his world, men didn't think much past the next ride, the next party, the next score. Legacy was for other people, people who lived different kinds of lives. Never really thought about it, he admitted. Well, you're still here, so there's time to start thinking. Eleanor's tone was matter-of-fact, as if the possibility of redemption was as natural as sunrise. Tell me about your daughter. Marcus felt his chest tighten. Sarah, she's 28 now. Lives in Portland, works for some non-profit that helps homeless kids. He paused, pride and pain warring in his expression. She's good people. Takes after her mother. When did you last speak to her? The question hit like a physical blow. 3 years, maybe 4. Called her on her birthday, but she didn't pick up. Can't say I blame her. Eleanor waited, giving him space to continue, or not, as he chose. I wasn't much of a father, Marcus said finally. Too caught up in club business, too angry all the time. Her mother left when Sarah was 12, took her to Oregon. Said she was tired of wondering if I'd come home in a body bag, and you let them go. It wasn't a question, and Marcus appreciated that Eleanor didn't try to soften it. Figured they were better off without me. Probably right. Eleanor studied him for a long moment, and Marcus had the uncomfortable feeling she was seeing straight through all his carefully constructed defenses. You know what I think? She said finally. What's that? I think you're afraid that if you try to reach out to Sarah, she'll reject you. So you reject yourself first. Saves you the pain of disappointment. Marcus stared into his coffee cup, Eleanor's words hitting closer to home than he wanted to admit. Maybe. The thing about regret, Eleanor continued gently, is that it grows heavier the longer you carry it. But forgiveness, that gets lighter with practice. Outside, a pickup truck rumbled past on the main road, and Marcus caught sight of the driver slowing to peer at his Harley parked in Eleanor's driveway. Small towns had long memories and curious eyes. 3 days later, Marcus found Eleanor collapsed in her garden. He had ridden over after lunch, carrying a bag of groceries from the small market in town. The clerk had given him suspicious looks, but Marcus had ignored them, focused on picking up the items Eleanor had mentioned needing. Coffee, flour, the good butter she liked for her baking. The Harley's engine was still ticking as it cooled when Marcus spotted her through the garden gate. Eleanor lay crumpled between the tomato plants, her face pale and drawn with pain. The hand-carved walking stick lay several feet away, as if she had reached for it but couldn't quite make the distance. Eleanor! Marcus vaulted over the low fence, his boots crushing late-season vegetables as he rushed to her side. She was conscious but breathing shallowly, one hand pressed to her chest. Can't seem to catch my breath, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Started feeling dizzy and then everything went sideways. Marcus knelt beside her, his mind racing through possibilities. Heart attack, stroke, any number of things that could kill a 73-year-old woman lying in a cold garden. His hands, so steady when handling weapons or machinery, trembled as he felt for her pulse. I'm calling an ambulance, he said, pulling out his phone. The nearest hospital was 40 minutes away, too long to wait if this was something serious. In my kitchen, Eleanor managed. Emergency contact list by the phone. Call Dr. Miller first. Marcus scooped Eleanor up as gently as he could, surprised by how light she felt in his arms. She had always seemed so solid, so permanent, that holding her fragile body was like discovering a beloved landmark had been built on sand. Inside, he settled her on the living room couch and found the emergency list tacked to the kitchen wall. Dr. Miller's number was at the top, followed by what looked like distant relatives with out-of-state area codes. No local family, no one who could be here in minutes instead of hours. Dr. Miller was a gruff man in his 60s who arrived within 10 minutes, black bag in hand and questions already forming. He examined Eleanor with practiced efficiency while Marcus paced the small living room like a caged animal. Blood pressure's elevated, but she's stable, Dr. Miller announced. Could be her heart, could be medication interaction. We need to get her to the hospital for tests. I'll drive her, Marcus said immediately. Dr. Miller looked at him properly for the first time, taking in the leather vest and the general aura of controlled violence that Marcus carried like a second skin. And you are? A friend, Eleanor said from the couch, her voice stronger now. Marcus has been helping me around the house. The doctor's expression suggested he had opinions about Eleanor accepting help from someone who looked like Marcus, but he kept them to himself. "The ambulance will be here in 20 minutes. Better to let the paramedics handle the transport." Marcus found himself sitting in the emergency room 3 hours later, surrounded by fluorescent lights and the antiseptic smell of institutional cleanliness. Eleanor was somewhere behind the double doors marked "Authorized Personnel Only," and he felt more helpless than he had since his early days in prison. The waiting room was nearly empty, except for a young mother with a feverish toddler and an elderly man reading a magazine with shaking hands. Marcus stared at the torn photograph in his wallet, a picture of him and Sarah from her 16th birthday. She was smiling in that forced way teenagers perfected, and he was wearing his dress uniform from his military days before everything went wrong. His phone buzzed. A text from someone in his old chapter, wondering where he'd disappeared to and when he was coming back. Marcus deleted it without responding. Dr. Miller emerged from the treatment area and approached Marcus with the measured pace of someone delivering news. "She's going to be fine. Mild heart episode, probably brought on by doing too much too soon. She needs rest and someone to keep an eye on her for a few days." "What about family?" Marcus asked. "Nearest relative is a niece in Denver." "I called the number Eleanor gave me but got voicemail. Left a message." Dr. Miller studied Marcus again. "She says you're staying to help her recover." Marcus realized he had made that decision without consciously thinking about it. "That's right. You understand that's a significant responsibility. Eleanor's not as young as she likes to think, and she has a tendency to overdo things." "I understand." Dr. Miller nodded slowly. "She speaks highly of you, says you've been a godsend these past few days. That carries weight with me, because Eleanor Whitfield is one of the finest people I know. When they finally brought Eleanor out in a wheelchair, she looked small and tired, but alert." She squeezed Marcus's hand as they helped her into his truck. "The Harley left behind at the hospital. Thank you," she said simply. Marcus had never felt so needed in his life. The next morning found Marcus in Eleanor's kitchen before dawn, trying to figure out how to work her ancient coffee percolator. He had slept on the living room couch, waking every few hours to check that she was still breathing peacefully in her bedroom down the hall. Eleanor emerged at 7, moving slowly but steadily, wrapped in a handmade quilt that Marcus was beginning to recognize as one of her own creations. The patchwork pattern told a story in fabric, each square a different memory stitched together with careful hands. "You didn't have to stay," she said, though her tone suggested she was grateful he had. "Doctor's orders," Marcus replied, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. "Besides, I make terrible coffee. Figured I should learn from an expert." Eleanor smiled and guided him through the proper technique, her patience endless as he fumbled with measurements and timing. It struck him that this was the first time in decades someone had taught him something without expecting payment or favors in return. Over breakfast, Eleanor shared stories of her children's younger years. Jenny, who had insisted on reading bedtime stories to her stuffed animals every night until she was 12. Paul, who built elaborate forts in the backyard and defended them against imaginary invaders with wooden swords. And David, the youngest, who collected smooth stones from the creek and painted them with elaborate designs. "He was going to be an artist," Eleanor said, buttering a piece of toast with careful precision. "Had such imagination. Used to say he was going to paint murals on the sides of buildings so everyone could see beauty on their way to work." Marcus found himself envying the warmth in her voice when she spoke of her children, even David, whose loss still clearly pained her. When he thought of Sarah, his memories were clouded with guilt and missed opportunities. Birthday parties he'd been too drunk to attend. School plays he'd skipped for club business, the gradual erosion of trust that had driven his family away. "What about your parents?" Eleanor asked. "Are they still living?" "Dad died when I was 19. Heart attack. Mom remarried a year later, moved to Florida with her new husband. We exchanged Christmas cards." Marcus shrugged as if it didn't matter, though the casual dismissal felt hollow. "Never been close. That must have been difficult, losing your father so young. Marcus considered this. His father had been a distant man, a factory worker who came home tired and stayed quiet through dinner before falling asleep in front of the television. Marcus had spent most of his teenage years angry at the man's passivity, his acceptance of a life that seemed to offer no adventure or purpose. "Maybe that's why I joined the military," Marcus said, surprising himself with the admission. "Looking for something my old man never found. Did you find it?" "For a while. Had good brothers, believed in the mission. Felt like I was part of something important." Marcus's expression darkened. "Then I got hurt in Afghanistan. Took shrapnel in my back, spent 8 months in hospitals. Got hooked on the pain pills they gave me." Eleanor listened without judgment, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug for warmth. "When I got out, couldn't hold down regular work. Too angry, too messed up. That's when I found the club. They understood what it was like to be broken. Gave me a new family, new purpose, for a while. But something changed." Marcus nodded. "Violence became the answer to everything. Money, territory, respect. Used to be we rode to feel free. Then it became about control, about making other people afraid. Sarah was 8 when she saw me come home with blood on my knuckles. Asked me why I was always so angry. What did you tell her? That sometimes the world makes you angry and you have to fight back." Marcus's voice was heavy with regret. "She looked at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was." Eleanor reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. Her skin was soft and warm, marked with age spots and the small scars that came from a lifetime of useful work. "You're not that man anymore," she said simply. "How can you be sure?" "Because that man wouldn't have stopped to help an old woman with her firewood. He wouldn't have spent the night on an uncomfortable couch just to make sure I was safe." Eleanor's grip tightened slightly. "People can change, Marcus, but they have to want to." Through the kitchen window, Marcus could see a pickup truck slowing down as it passed the house, the driver craning his neck to get a better look at the Harley parked in the driveway. In a town this size, his presence wouldn't stay secret long. The trouble started at Miller's General Store on Marcus's 4th day in Cedar Ridge. He had gone in to buy groceries for Eleanor, who was recovering well but still tired easily. The store was a throwback to an earlier era, with wooden floors that creaked underfoot and shelves that stretched to the ceiling. Behind the counter, elderly proprietor Frank Miller watched Marcus with unconcealed suspicion. "You're the one staying out at Eleanor's place," Frank said. It wasn't a question. "That's right." Marcus placed a basket of items on the counter. Soup, crackers, the herbal tea Eleanor favored. Frank rang up the purchases with deliberate slowness, studying each item as if it might reveal something about Marcus's character. "Known Eleanor since she moved here in '78. Good woman. Deserves better than trouble showing up on her doorstep." Marcus kept his expression neutral, though his jaw tightened. "Just helping a neighbor." "Neighbor?" Frank's laugh was sharp and humorless. "That what they're calling it now?" The store's bell chimed as Sheriff Dale Barnes entered, his presence filling the small space with an authority that made other customers step aside. Barnes was in his 50s, built like a man who had wrestled steers in his younger days and still could if pressed. His eyes found Marcus immediately. "Mr. Morrison," Barnes said, his tone carefully polite. "Heard you've been staying out at the Whitfield place." Mrs. Whitfield had a health scare. "I'm helping during her recovery. Very neighborly of you." Barnes approached the counter, his hand resting casually on his service weapon. "Mind if we step outside for a chat?" It wasn't really a request. Marcus paid for the groceries and followed the sheriff onto the sidewalk, aware that half the store's customers had pressed themselves against the windows to watch. "Let's take a walk," Barnes suggested, leading Marcus down the street away from curious ears. Cedar Ridge's main drag was 2 blocks of aging storefronts and faded optimism, the kind of place where everyone's business became everyone else's entertainment. "I ran your plates," Barnes said without preamble. "Interesting reading. Assault, weapons charges, suspected involvement in drug trafficking. All of it connected to the Hells Angels." Marcus had expected this conversation from the moment he decided to stay. "I've paid my debts to society. Have you?" Barnes stopped walking and turned to face him. Because what I see is a career criminal who's suddenly playing Good Samaritan with one of our most vulnerable residents. Makes me wonder what your real angle is. There's no angle. Eleanor Whitfield is a treasure in this community. Taught half the kids in this county, helped more families through hard times than I can count. If you're running some kind of con on her, I'm not. Marcus's voice carried an edge of warning that made Barnes's hand drift toward his weapon again. Then what are you doing here? Really? Marcus considered his answer carefully. The truth was, he didn't entirely know himself. She needed help. I was in a position to provide it, and that's it. Nothing in it for you. Sometimes people do things without expecting a payoff, Sheriff. Barnes studied him for a long moment. Maybe. But in my experience, leopards don't change their spots. They just get better at hiding them. That evening, Eleanor received a phone call that lasted nearly an hour. Marcus could hear her voice from the kitchen, calm but firm, though he couldn't make out the words. When she finally hung up, her expression was troubled. That was Meredith Chen from the town council, Eleanor said, settling into her chair by the fireplace. Apparently there's been some concern expressed about your presence here. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. What kind of concern? The usual small-town nonsense. People wondering about your intentions, whether I'm safe, whether you're planning to bring your motorcycle friends here to cause trouble. Are you having second thoughts about me staying? Eleanor's answer came without hesitation. Absolutely not. But I thought you should know that there's talk of calling a special council meeting to discuss the situation. Marcus stared into the fire, watching the flames dance over the split oak he had stacked just days ago. Maybe I should go. I don't want to cause problems for you. The only problem, Eleanor said firmly, is that this town has become so set in its ways that we've forgotten how to extend grace to strangers. When Robert and I moved here, we were outsiders too. Long-haired hippie carpenter and his wife, people called us. Some folks weren't sure we'd fit in. That's different, is it? The fear is the same. Fear of change, fear of the unknown, fear that letting someone different into our circle might somehow diminish us. Eleanor reached for the anonymous note that had been slipped under her door that afternoon. Crude letters spelling out words like dangerous and get rid of him. This isn't who we are, she said, crumpling the paper. Or at least, it's not who we should be. The town council meeting was held on a Tuesday evening in the community centre, a drafty building that smelled of old coffee and decades of heated debates. Marcus hadn't planned to attend, but Eleanor insisted they face the situation together. Running away never solved anything, she said as they walked up the front steps. Besides, these people need to see who you really are, not just what they imagine. Inside, folding chairs were arranged in neat rows, facing a long table where 5 council members sat with uncomfortable expressions. About 30 residents had shown up, more than Marcus had expected, for a special session. He recognized Frank Miller from the general store and several other faces from around town, all watching him with varying degrees of suspicion and curiosity. Council chairwoman Meredith Chen called the meeting to order and explained that concerns had been raised about a transient individual staying with Eleanor Whitfield. The clinical language couldn't disguise the fear underlying the discussion. Mrs. Whitfield, Chen said, we understand you've been hosting this gentleman in your home. Some residents have expressed concern for your safety and well-being. Eleanor stood slowly, using her walking stick for support. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had taught in classrooms for 30 years. I appreciate everyone's concern, she began, but I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions about who I invite into my home. Marcus Morrison has been nothing but helpful and respectful. He probably saved my life when I collapsed in my garden. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sheriff Barnes cleared his throat. With all due respect, Mrs. Whitfield, Mr. Morrison has a criminal record, multiple arrests, association with known criminal organizations, and Eleanor's tone was sharp. Are we now judging people solely by their worst moments? Because if that's the case, I suspect most of us in this room would fail that test. Marcus felt the weight of every gaze in the room. Part of him wanted to stand up and defend himself, to explain how he'd changed, how Eleanor's kindness had reminded him of the man he used to be. Instead, he remained silent, letting Eleanor speak for both of them. "I want to tell you about the man I've come to know," Eleanor continued. "A man who stops to help strangers without being asked, who sits with an old woman through a medical emergency and asks for nothing in return, who listens to stories about my late husband and my children with genuine interest and compassion." She paused, scanning the faces before her. "When my David died 20 years ago, this community rallied around me. You brought casseroles and offered shoulders to cry on. You showed me what grace looks like in action. I'm asking you to show that same grace now." The mention of David seemed to shift something in the room. Marcus saw several people exchange glances, their hostility softening into something more thoughtful. "But Mrs. Whitfield," said Tom Bradley, "who owned the hardware store, how do we know he won't bring trouble here? Those motorcycle gangs, they have enemies. What if someone comes looking for him?" Before Eleanor could respond, Marcus stood. The room fell silent, and he could feel the collective tension rise. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. "Mr. Bradley raises a fair point," Marcus said. "I can't promise that my past won't follow me here, but I can promise that if it does, I'll leave before anyone in this town gets hurt." He looked around the room, meeting as many eyes as would hold his gaze. "I know what you see when you look at me. The leather, the tattoos, the reputation. I've spent most of my life being exactly what you think I am. But Mrs. Whitfield saw something else, something I'd forgotten was there." Marcus's voice grew stronger. "I served my country for 8 years before everything went wrong. Purple Heart, Bronze Star, 3 tours in Afghanistan. I was a good soldier before I became a broken one. Maybe I can be a good man again, if you'll give me the chance to try." The silence stretched for long moments. Finally, Dr. Miller spoke up from the back of the room. "Eleanor's judgment has always been sound. If she vouches for this man, that carries weight with me." Slowly, others began to nod agreement. Not everyone, but enough to shift the mood from hostility to cautious acceptance. When the formal vote was taken, the council decided by a narrow margin to take no action, effectively allowing Marcus to stay as long as Eleanor welcomed him. Walking home under the stars, Eleanor linked her arm through Marcus's. "That wasn't so bad, was it?" Marcus thought about the faces in that room, the fear and suspicion gradually giving way to something approaching understanding. "You stood up for me in there. Why?" "Because sometimes the people who need grace the most are the least likely to ask for it." Eleanor squeezed his arm gently. "And because I believe in second chances. Third chances too, if necessary." For the first time in years, Marcus felt like he might actually deserve one. 2 weeks after the town meeting, Marcus found himself staring at his phone at 3 in the morning, Sarah's number glowing on the screen. He had dialed it 17 times in the past week, hanging up before it could ring. Each attempt left him feeling more cowardly than the last. Eleanor discovered him in the kitchen, fully dressed and pacing like a caged animal. She took one look at the phone in his hand and understood immediately. "Having trouble sleeping?" she asked, settling into her chair with the patience of someone who had spent years dealing with troubled souls. "Keeps going to voicemail," Marcus said, though they both knew he hadn't let it ring long enough to find out. "What are you afraid she'll say?" Marcus set the phone on the table and rubbed his face with both hands. "That she doesn't want to hear from me, that I waited too long, that she's better off without me in her life." Eleanor poured 2 cups of tea from the pot she kept warm on the stove. "And what if she says all of that? Then at least I'll know where I stand. Will you?" Eleanor's tone was gentle but probing. "Or will you just use her rejection as an excuse to stop trying?" The question hit closer to home than Marcus wanted to admit. He had spent so many years protecting himself from disappointment that he had forgotten how to take real risks, the kind that might actually lead somewhere good. "What if I write her a letter first?" he said finally. "Test the waters." Eleanor smiled and produced a box of cream-colored stationery from a kitchen drawer. "I was wondering when you'd get around to that idea." Marcus stared at the blank paper for nearly an hour before putting pen to page. He wrote and rewrote the opening sentence a dozen times, each version sounding either too casual or too dramatic. Finally, he settled on simple honesty. "Dear Sarah, I know it's been too long since we talked, and I know that's my fault. I've been thinking about you a lot lately, wondering how you're doing, whether you're happy. I hope you are. I'm writing from a place called Cedar Ridge, Montana. I've been staying with a friend named Eleanor, helping her around her farm. She's taught me some things about being a better person, and I thought maybe you'd want to know that I'm trying." The words came easier after that. 3 pages of thoughts and memories he had carried for years without sharing. He told her about Eleanor's wisdom, about the town that had learned to accept him despite his past, about the man he was trying to become. He didn't ask for forgiveness or demand a response, just let her know that she was loved and thought of daily. When he finished, Eleanor helped him address the envelope with Sarah's Portland address, copied from a Christmas card he had saved for 3 years. "Now what?" Marcus asked. "Now we wait," Eleanor said. "And hope." The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Marcus was splitting firewood when he heard vehicles approaching, the rumble of multiple motorcycles accompanied by a pickup truck. He recognized the sound immediately, the particular rhythm of Harley engines that meant his past had finally caught up with him. 3 members of his old chapter pulled into Eleanor's driveway, their bikes gleaming with chrome and attitude. Marcus knew all of them: Jake Razor Williams, the chapter president, Tommy Sledge Carson, the sergeant-at-arms, and Billy Kowalski, who had been Marcus's closest friend in the club. Eleanor emerged from the house as the engines fell silent, taking in the scene with the calm assessment of someone who had dealt with difficult situations before. She carried her walking stick but held it casually, a tool rather than a weapon. "Tank," Jake said, removing his helmet. "Been looking for you, brother." Marcus set down the splitting axe and wiped his hands on his jeans. "Jake, Tommy, Billy?" He nodded to each man in turn. "Long way to come for a social call." "Club business," Jake said, his eyes taking in Eleanor's farmhouse, the neat garden, the domestic tranquility that surrounded them. "You missed the last 3 church meetings. Brothers are wondering if you've forgotten where you belong." Church was what the Hells Angels called their mandatory meetings, gatherings where club business was discussed and loyalty was tested. Missing one was a serious offense. Missing 3 bordered on abandonment. "Been busy," Marcus said carefully. Tommy stepped forward, his bulk casting a shadow across the yard. "Busy playing house with Grandma." The contempt in his voice made Marcus's hands clench into fists, but Eleanor's presence beside him kept him steady. She had moved closer without being obvious about it, close enough to intervene if things went wrong, but far enough away to give Marcus room to handle the situation. "Mrs. Whitfield has been kind enough to let me help during her recovery," Marcus said. "I'll be back when I'm not needed here." Jake's laugh was harsh. "That's not how this works, Tank. Club comes first. Always has, always will." "Things change," Marcus replied. And even as he said it, he realized how much truth those words carried. Jake pulled a folded newsletter from his jacket pocket, the Hells Angels chapter communication that Marcus had once read religiously. The paper was worn from handling, marked with the club's Death Head logo, and filled with updates on territory disputes, legal troubles and brotherhood obligations. "Your name's still on the roster." "Tank," Jake said, holding up the newsletter. "That means something." Or it used to. Marcus could see Eleanor from the corner of his eye, standing quietly but alert, ready to retreat into the house if necessary. The smart thing would be to go with his brothers, to leave this peaceful place before violence found it. But looking at Eleanor's calm dignity, he realized he was tired of running from consequences. "I've been thinking about a lot of things lately," Marcus said carefully. "About what brotherhood really means. About whether loyalty should be earned or just demanded." Tommy stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You're questioning the club, Tank?" "I'm questioning myself." Billy, who had been silent until now, shook his head with something like disappointment. "Man, this place has really gotten to you. You sound like a different person." "Maybe I am." The words hung in the air between them, carrying weight that everyone present understood. In the Hells Angels, transformation was viewed with suspicion. Change meant weakness, evolution meant betrayal. Jake's expression hardened. Club took you in when you had nothing, gave you brothers, purpose, respect, and this is how you repay that loyalty. Marcus thought about the early days when the camaraderie had felt real and the rebellion had seemed noble. But he also remembered the gradual slide into violence, the way respect had become fear, the way brotherhood had become control. The club saved me once, Marcus admitted, but it's been killing me slowly ever since. Eleanor spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the authority of age and wisdom. Gentlemen, would you like some coffee? It's a long ride back to wherever you came from. The offer was so unexpected, so grandmotherly normal, that it threw the bikers off balance. Tommy actually laughed, though it sounded more nervous than amused. Thanks, lady, but we're not staying long, Jake said. Just here to collect our brother and head home. I see, Eleanor said pleasantly. And if your brother chooses not to come. The question was delivered with such innocent curiosity that it took a moment for the implied challenge to sink in. Jake's face darkened as he realized this elderly woman was not intimidated by their presence. Lady, you don't understand what you're dealing with here, Tommy said, his voice carrying an edge of threat. Marcus stepped between them, his body language shifting into something harder, more dangerous. You need to watch your tone when you're talking to Mrs. Whitfield. Or what? Tommy shot back. You going to fight your own brothers over some old woman? The confrontation balanced on a knife's edge. Marcus could feel the familiar adrenaline surge, the readiness for violence that had carried him through countless conflicts. But Eleanor's presence behind him was like an anchor, reminding him of who he was trying to become. I don't want to fight anyone, Marcus said, but I won't let you disrespect her in her own home. Billy stepped forward, hands raised in a peacekeeping gesture. Hey, nobody wants trouble here. We just came to talk to Tank, find out when he's coming back to the family. Marcus looked at each of his former brothers in turn, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. Jake's barely contained aggression, Tommy's casual cruelty, Billy's willingness to follow wherever stronger men led. These were the people he had called family for 15 years. I'm not coming back, Marcus said quietly. The words seemed to echo in the autumn air. Jake's hand drifted toward his jacket, where Marcus knew he kept a .38 revolver. Tommy's posture shifted into a fighting stance. Only Billy looked genuinely surprised, as if he had never considered that someone might voluntarily leave the Brotherhood. That's not how this works, Tank, Jake said. You know the rules. Once a brother, always a brother. The only way out is in a box. Eleanor moved closer to Marcus, not hiding behind him but standing beside him. Young man, she said to Jake, her tone carrying the kind of disappointed authority that had once cowed classroom troublemakers. You're welcome to visit, but threats are not acceptable on my property. Jake stared at her for a long moment, clearly unsure how to handle this unexpected resistance. In his world, intimidation usually worked. Elderly women typically called the police or hid behind locked doors. They didn't stand their ground and lecture him about acceptable behavior. This isn't over, Tank, Jake said finally. Club's got a long memory and a longer reach. I know, Marcus replied, but I'm not running anymore. The three bikers mounted their machines and roared away, leaving behind the acrid smell of exhaust and the lingering threat of future confrontation. 3 days after the confrontation with his former brothers, Marcus found Eleanor sitting at her kitchen table with a yellowed newspaper clipping spread before her. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed the creased paper, and her eyes held a sadness that seemed to reach back through decades. Eleanor? Marcus approached carefully, sensing the weight of whatever moment had settled over the kitchen. Everything all right? She looked up at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between sorrow and a strange kind of peace. I think it's time you knew the truth about why I wasn't afraid of you that first day. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. What do you mean? Eleanor gestured to the chair across from her. Sit down, dear, please. The newspaper clipping was from the Cedar Ridge Gazette, dated October 15th, 20 years ago. The headline read, Local man dies in motorcycle accident. Below it was a photograph of a young man with Eleanor's eyes and a smile that seemed to light up the page. Marcus's breath caught as he read the article. David Whitfield, age 22, had been killed when his motorcycle collided with a group of Hell's Angels who were passing through town. The bikers had been speeding, running from a bar fight that had turned violent. David had been on his way home from his job at the hardware store when the collision occurred. "Your son," Marcus whispered. "My youngest," Eleanor confirmed, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. He was going to art school in the fall. Had saved up enough money for his first semester by working 2 jobs all summer. Marcus stared at the photograph, his mind reeling. "The Hell's Angels who killed him." "You were there," Eleanor said simply. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He remembered that night 20 years ago, the chaos and confusion after Billy had gotten into a fight with some locals. They had been riding hard to get out of town before the police arrived. There had been an accident, he remembered, but in his drunken, adrenaline-fueled state, the details had been hazy. "I didn't know," Marcus said, though the words felt inadequate. "I remember the accident, but I didn't know about your son. I didn't know his name or—" "I know," Eleanor said gently. "You weren't driving the bike that hit him. That was a man named Curtis Shaw. He was killed in prison 3 years later." Marcus felt sick. "How long have you known who I was?" "Since the first day you stopped to help me with the firewood." Eleanor folded the newspaper clipping with careful precision. "When you told me your name, I recognized it from the police report. Marcus Morrison, also known as Tank, member of the Hell's Angels Riverside chapter." "Then why?" Marcus's voice cracked. "Why did you invite me in? Why did you help me?" Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the garden where David used to help her plant vegetables. "Do you know what I felt when the police told me about the accident?" Marcus shook his head, not trusting his voice. "Rage," Eleanor said. "Pure consuming rage. I wanted those men to suffer the way David suffered. I wanted them to lose everything they loved, the way I had lost my boy." She paused, touching the newspaper clipping one more time. "I carried that anger for years, Marcus. It poisoned everything good in my life. Drove away friends, made me bitter toward my surviving children, turned me into someone David wouldn't have recognized. How did you let it go?" "Time helped. Therapy helped. But mostly, I realized that hatred was killing me slowly, and David wouldn't have wanted that. He was the gentlest soul you ever met, wouldn't hurt a fly. The idea that his death would make me cruel would have broken his heart." Marcus felt tears burning his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Eleanor. I'm so goddamn sorry. I know you are." Eleanor reached across the table and took his hand. "And I forgave you a long time ago. Not because you deserved it, but because I needed to be free of the anger. But I was part of it. Part of the group that took your son from you." "Yes," Eleanor said simply. "You were. And when I saw you broken down on my driveway, struggling with your own demons, I thought maybe God was giving me a chance to choose love over vengeance." Marcus stared at their joined hands, unable to process the magnitude of her forgiveness. "The whole town knows, don't they? About David, about me being there that night? Some of them have figured it out. Sheriff Barnes certainly knows, Dr. Miller too." Eleanor smiled sadly. "I think that's why the town meeting went the way it did. They were watching to see what I would do, whether I would choose forgiveness or revenge. And you chose forgiveness. I chose healing," Eleanor corrected. "For both of us." The next morning, Marcus found himself standing before a small wooden cross at the edge of Cedar Ridge Cemetery. Eleanor had painted it herself years ago, white with delicate blue flowers that matched the forget-me-nots David had loved to pick as a child. The paint had weathered, but still held its gentle beauty, much like the woman who tended it faithfully. Eleanor knelt beside the grave, pulling weeds with careful precision, despite her arthritis. She had been coming here every Tuesday for 20 years, rain or shine, bringing fresh flowers when the season allowed, and simply talking to her son about the week's events. "I brought someone to meet you." "Sweetheart," she said softly, placing a bundle of late-season chrysanthemums against the cross. "This is Marcus, the man I told you about. The one who's been helping me around the house." Marcus felt his throat close up. Standing here, seeing the physical reality of David's resting place, made the magnitude of Eleanor's forgiveness almost unbearable. "Mrs. Whitfield, I don't think I should—" "You should," she said firmly, rising with some difficulty. "David would want to meet the man who's been taking such good care of his mother." Marcus knelt beside the grave, his knees pressing into the soft earth. The headstone was simple granite. Bearing David's name, dates, and a single line, he painted the world more beautiful. "I'm sorry," Marcus whispered, the words feeling wholly inadequate. "I'm so sorry, David. If I could take it back, if I could trade places with you, I would." Eleanor's hand settled on his shoulder. "Tell him about the man you're trying to become." Marcus struggled to find words. "I'm trying to be better. Your mother, she's teaching me what that looks like. She's showing me that people can change, that it's never too late to choose something different." His voice broke. "I wish you could see her garden, kid. She's got tomatoes as big as baseballs and roses that would make you want to paint them." They stayed there for nearly an hour, Eleanor sharing memories of David's childhood, while Marcus listened and tried to imagine the young man whose life had been cut short. David, who collected smooth stones from the creek and painted them with elaborate designs. David, who wanted to put murals on building walls so people could see beauty on their way to work. When they finally walked back to Eleanor's truck, Marcus felt something had shifted between them, some final barrier dissolved by the simple act of shared grief acknowledged. "Thank you," he said as they drove home. "For what?" "For letting me apologize to him. For including me in something so personal." Eleanor nodded. "Grief shared is grief halved, they say. I think David would have liked you, Marcus. He always saw the good in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves." That afternoon brought an unexpected phone call. Marcus answered Eleanor's kitchen phone to hear a young woman's voice, uncertain but hopeful. "Is this Marcus Morrison?" His heart stopped. "Sarah, I got your letter." Her voice was exactly as he remembered it, though deeper now, marked by the years he had missed. "I've been thinking about it for days, and I wanted to call." Marcus gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles went white. "I'm glad you did. How are you? How's your work?" "I'm good." "The work is hard but meaningful. We help kids aging out of foster care, give them life skills and job training." Sarah paused. "Your letter, it sounded different. Like you've changed." "I'm trying to. The woman you mentioned, Eleanor. She sounds special." Marcus looked through the kitchen window to where Eleanor was deadheading flowers in her garden, moving slowly but purposefully among the plants David had once helped her tend. "She is. She saved my life, Sarah, not in some dramatic way, just by showing me kindness when I needed it most." "I'd like to meet her," Sarah said quietly. "And I'd like to see you." "If that's something you want," Marcus had to sit down. "More than anything, I could drive up next weekend, take some time off work." "Are you sure?" "It's a long way to come, Dad," Sarah said, and the word hit him like a gift he'd never expected to receive again. "I've been waiting for you to change for 15 years. If there's a chance you really have, then no distance is too far." After they hung up, Marcus found Eleanor in the garden and told her about the call. She smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had been expecting good news. "I'll make up the guest room," she said simply, "and maybe bake something special for dinner." "What does Sarah like?" Marcus realized he didn't know his daughter's favorite foods anymore, didn't know her preferences or dreams or daily routines. But he had a chance to learn them again, and that felt like the most precious gift imaginable. Word of Sarah's impending visit spread through Cedar Ridge faster than Marcus had expected. By Thursday morning, he found himself surrounded by an unlikely support network of townspeople who had somehow appointed themselves as welcoming committee for his daughter's arrival. Dr. Miller stopped by with a bottle of wine and advice about father-daughter conversations. "Been through it myself with 3 girls, he said gruffly. "Key is to listen more than you talk, and don't try to fix everything in one weekend." Sally from the cafe brought a casserole and offered to cater dinner. "First impressions matter," she declared, bustling around Eleanor's kitchen as if she owned it. "We want this young lady to see that her father has good people looking after him." Even Sheriff Barnes made an appearance, ostensibly to check on Eleanor's security following the Hells Angels visit, but really to offer his own awkward encouragement. "Taking guts to face your daughter after all these years," Barnes admitted, accepting a cup of Eleanor's coffee. "Respect that, even if I still don't trust your past associations." The community petition appeared Friday afternoon, delivered by Tom Bradley from the hardware store. 24 signatures supporting Marcus's right to remain in Cedar Ridge, including several from people who had opposed him at the town meeting. Meredith Chen organized it, Tom explained, clearly still surprised by his own participation. "Figured if your daughter's coming to visit, we ought to show her that her father's found himself a real home here." Marcus stared at the petition, overwhelmed by the unexpected solidarity. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," Tom replied. "Just keep being the man Eleanor sees in you." Eleanor herself had thrown herself into preparations with an energy that worried Marcus. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, reorganized the guest room twice, and planned elaborate meals that would have challenged a restaurant kitchen. "You don't have to go to all this trouble," Marcus protested as she rearranged flowers for the third time. "Nonsense," Eleanor replied, stepping back to assess her handiwork. "Sarah is family now, and family deserves the best we can offer." The simple declaration hit Marcus harder than he expected. Family. When had anyone last considered him part of a family that wasn't bound by leather and violence? Friday evening brought an unexpected complication. Marcus was chopping vegetables for dinner when he spotted Jake's motorcycle approaching from the main road. This time Jake was alone, his arrival announced only by the rumble of his Harley and the tension that immediately filled the air. Marcus stepped onto the porch, intercepting Jake before he could reach the front door. "Thought I made myself clear the other day?" Jake removed his helmet, revealing a face marked by exhaustion and something that might have been regret. "Club voted, Tank. You're officially out. No ceremony, no violence, just done." The news should have brought relief, but Marcus sensed there was more. And some of the younger brothers aren't happy about it. "Think you disrespected the club, made us look weak." Jake's expression was grim. "Word is, they might decide to make an example out of you anyway, official or not." Marcus felt the familiar cold settle in his stomach. "How much time do I have?" "Maybe a week, maybe less." "They're still arguing about it, but hotheads like Tommy are pushing for action." Jake paused, studying Marcus's face. "You could still come back, Tank. Make this right." "No," Marcus said without hesitation. "I'm done with that life." Jake nodded as if he'd expected that answer. "Then you better be ready for them when they come." "Because they will come, and they won't be as reasonable as I am." After Jake left, Marcus found Eleanor in the kitchen, her hands busy with nervous energy as she arranged and rearranged items that were already perfectly organized. "How much did you hear?" he asked. "Enough." Eleanor's voice was steady, but Marcus could see the worry in her eyes. "What are you going to do?" Marcus considered his options. He could run, disappear into the night, and lead any trouble away from Eleanor and Cedar Ridge. A week ago, that would have been his automatic response. But Sarah was coming tomorrow, and the town had just signed a petition supporting his presence, and Eleanor was looking at him with trust he couldn't bear to betray. "I'm going to stay," he said. "This is my home now, and I'm not running anymore." Eleanor smiled, and Marcus saw pride mixed with her worry. "Good. Then we'll face whatever comes together." "Eleanor, if they come here, if there's violence, then the community will handle it the way communities should," she interrupted. "Together." "You're not alone in this anymore, Marcus." Looking around the kitchen that had become more familiar than any place he'd ever lived, Marcus realized she was right. For the first time in his adult life, he had something worth fighting for that wasn't built on anger or territory or revenge. He had a home, and tomorrow his daughter would see it, Sarah arrived Saturday morning in a blue Honda Civic that looked impossibly small after weeks of Harley-Davidsons and pickup trucks. Marcus watched from the kitchen window as she sat in her car for several minutes, gathering courage or perhaps reconsidering her decision to come. When she finally emerged, Marcus saw the woman his little girl had become. 28 years old, with his dark hair but her mother's gentle eyes, wearing jeans and a sweater that spoke of a life lived carefully, responsibly. She moved with purpose toward the house, carrying a bouquet of sunflowers and what looked like homemade cookies. Eleanor opened the door before Sarah could knock, welcoming her with the warmth she showed all visitors, but with an extra tenderness that acknowledged the importance of this moment. "You must be Sarah," Eleanor said, accepting the flowers. "I'm Eleanor. Your father has told me so much about you. All good things, I hope," Sarah replied, her voice carrying nervous humor. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his hands unconsciously smoothing his shirt, suddenly aware of every scar and tattoo that marked his past. "Hi, baby girl." The childhood nickname slipped out before he could stop it, and for a moment Sarah's carefully composed expression cracked, revealing the hurt and hope she'd been carrying for years. "Hi, Dad." They embraced awkwardly on the front porch, both uncertain how much contact was appropriate after so much lost time. But gradually the hug deepened, and Marcus felt years of regret and longing pour out in that simple gesture. "You look good," Sarah said when they separated. "Different." "Peaceful, maybe. I feel different," Marcus admitted. "Eleanor's been a good influence." They spent the morning in Eleanor's kitchen, conversation flowing more easily than Marcus had dared hope. Sarah told stories about her work with homeless teenagers, her apartment in Portland, her pottery classes, and weekend hiking trips. Marcus shared carefully edited versions of his recent transformation, focusing on Eleanor's wisdom and the community's gradual acceptance. Eleanor, wise enough to recognize when father and daughter needed space, excused herself to tend her garden. Through the window, Marcus could see her moving among the plants David had once helped her care for, giving them this time to rebuild their relationship. "She's wonderful," Sarah said, watching Eleanor with obvious affection. "I can see why she means so much to you." "She saved my life," Marcus said simply. "Not in some dramatic way, just by showing me kindness when I needed it most." The peaceful morning shattered at noon when 5 motorcycles roared into the driveway. Marcus recognized the sound immediately. The aggressive rumble of engines revved high for intimidation. Through the window he saw Tommy leading a group of younger club members, their bikes arranged in a semicircle that blocked any easy escape. "Stay inside," Marcus told Sarah, moving toward the door. "Dad, what's happening?" "Just some people from my past who can't let go," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "I need to handle this." Eleanor appeared from the garden, her walking stick in hand and her expression calm but alert. She positioned herself between the bikers and the house. A 73-year-old woman facing down 5 men half her age and twice her size. "Gentlemen," she said pleasantly, as if welcoming expected guests. "Can I help you with something?" Tommy dismounted his bike, his bulk casting a shadow across Eleanor's neat garden. "We're here for Tank, old lady." "Glove business. Mr. Morrison is entertaining his daughter today," Eleanor replied. "Perhaps you could make an appointment for a more convenient time." The absurdity of the suggestion seemed to throw Tommy off balance. Behind him, the younger bikers exchanged uncertain glances, clearly unprepared for this response. Marcus stepped onto the porch, placing himself between Eleanor and the bikers. "I thought Jake made it clear. I'm out of the club. Jake don't speak for all of us," Tommy snarled. "You disrespected the Brotherhood, Tank. Made us look weak. That's got consequences." From inside the house, Marcus could see Sarah watching through the window, her face pale with fear and understanding. This was exactly what she had grown up afraid of. The violence that had driven her and her mother away. "The only consequence," Eleanor said clearly, "is that you're trespassing on private property and disturbing the peace." More vehicles were approaching. Sheriff Barnes in his patrol car, Dr. Miller in his pickup truck, Tom Bradley from the hardware store. Word had spread quickly through Cedar Ridge's informal communication network, and the community was responding. Tommy looked around nervously as more townspeople arrived, their presence changing the dynamics of the confrontation. What had been designed as intimidation was becoming a public spectacle. "This ain't over, Tank," Tommy said, but his voice had lost some of its menace. "Yes, it is," Marcus replied. "It's been over for a long time. I just finally figured that out." The bikers left as suddenly as they had arrived, their departure marked by angry engine revs and the spray of gravel from spinning tires. Sheriff Barnes followed them to the county line, ensuring they understood that their return would be met with arrest warrants rather than tolerance. In the aftermath, Eleanor's kitchen filled with neighbors bringing coffee, comfort, and quiet solidarity. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, still pale but composed, watching the community rally around her father with obvious amazement. "Does this happen often?" she asked Dr. Miller, who was checking Eleanor's blood pressure despite her protests that she was perfectly fine. "First time," Dr. Miller admitted. "But Marcus has been part of this community for weeks now. We look after our own." Marcus found himself surrounded by people offering support, advice, and protection if needed. Tom Bradley promised to organize a neighborhood watch. Sally insisted on catering dinner for Sarah's visit. Even Meredith Chen arrived with a thermos of soup and an update on legal options if the bikers returned. "I can't believe they all came," Marcus said to Eleanor as the crowd gradually dispersed. "I can," Eleanor replied. "You've spent weeks helping people, Marcus. Mrs. Patterson's groceries when her arthritis flared up, fixing the Henderson's fence after the storm, listening to old Frank Miller's war stories every time you go to the store. Kindness has a way of coming back when you need it most." Sarah watched these interactions with growing understanding. "This is what you meant in your letter, isn't it? About finding a place where you belong," Marcus nodded. "I never expected to feel at home anywhere, especially not a place like this. But these people, they looked past what I was and saw what I could become, like Eleanor did with you." "Like Eleanor did with all of us," Marcus corrected. "She's the heart of this community, Sarah, has been for 40 years. That evening, after Sheriff Barnes returned with confirmation that the bikers had left the county, Sarah helped Eleanor prepare dinner, while Marcus sat at the kitchen table writing a letter he should have written years ago. This one wasn't to Sarah but to his ex-wife, Linda, explaining his transformation and asking if they might find a way to be civil for their daughter's sake. "Mum will be surprised to hear from you," Sarah said, reading over his shoulder. "But I think she'll be glad too. She never stopped caring, Dad. She just couldn't live with the person you were then." "I don't blame her," Marcus said. "I couldn't live with that person either, turns out." Eleanor served them a dinner worthy of a celebration. Roast chicken with herbs from her garden, fresh bread, and the apple pie that had started their friendship weeks ago. Sarah insisted on helping with dishes, chatting easily with Eleanor about recipes and gardening, as if they had known each other for years. "I can see why Dad loves it here," Sarah said, drying a plate with one of Eleanor's handmade dish towels. "It feels like the kind of place where people still know how to be neighbors." "Your father has been a blessing to this community," Eleanor replied. "But I think we've been good for him too." Later, as they sat in the living room watching the fire crackle in the stone hearth, Sarah made an announcement that surprised them both. "I've been thinking about making a change," she said. "Portland's expensive and the work is rewarding but exhausting. There's a non-profit in Missoula that helps rural youth, about an hour from here. They've been trying to recruit me for months." Marcus felt his heart skip. "You'd move closer?" "I'd like to be near family again," Sarah said simply. "Both of you, if that's all right." Eleanor smiled with satisfaction, as if she had been expecting this development all along. "The guest room will always be ready for you, dear." Marcus struggled to find words for the gratitude flooding through him. 6 months ago, he had been a man with no family, no home, no purpose beyond the next mile of highway. Now he sat in a warm kitchen with his daughter planning visits and his chosen mother offering unconditional love. "I love you, baby girl," he said to Sarah. I know I don't have the right to say that after all these years, but it's true. You've always had the right, Sarah replied, squeezing his hand. I just needed to see that you remembered how. Outside, snow began to fall, the first of the season dusting Eleanor's garden with gentle white. Through the window, Marcus could see David's painted stones marking the border of the flower beds. Smooth river rocks that had survived 20 winters and would survive 20 more. Just like the love that had brought this unlikely family together. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the fellowship hall of Cedar Ridge Community Church, watching Sarah arrange flowers for the scholarship fund ceremony. The late spring sunshine streamed through tall windows, casting warm light on the gathered crowd of townspeople who had come to honor David Whitfield's memory. The David Whitfield Memorial Scholarship for At-Risk Youth had been Sarah's idea, but the entire community had embraced it with enthusiasm that surprised even Marcus. The fund would send one local teenager to art school each year, giving them the chance David never got to fulfill his dreams. Nervous? Eleanor asked, appearing at Marcus's elbow with her walking stick and a knowing smile. Terrified, Marcus admitted. Speaking in front of people isn't exactly my strong suit. You'll do fine. Just speak from the heart. Marcus looked around the room at faces that had become familiar over the winter months. Dr. Miller and his wife Martha. Tom Bradley and his teenage son, who had started helping Marcus with odd jobs around town. Sheriff Barnes, who had grudgingly admitted that Marcus had proven himself a valuable community member. Even Frank Miller from the general store, who now greeted Marcus by name and always asked about Eleanor's health. Sarah had taken the job in Missoula and visited every weekend, her small apartment there serving mainly as a place to store work clothes. Most of her free time was spent in Cedar Ridge, helping Eleanor with projects and slowly building the relationship with Marcus that both had thought was lost forever. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Marcus still woke some nights from dreams of his old life, still caught himself scanning for threats that no longer existed. But Eleanor's patient wisdom and Sarah's gradual trust had given him something to anchor himself to when the past tried to pull him backward. Ladies and gentlemen, Meredith Chen called the gathering to order. Thank you all for coming to celebrate the launch of the David Whitfield Memorial Scholarship. Before we hear from our scholarship recipient, I'd like to invite Marcus Morrison to say a few words about why this fund matters to our community. Marcus approached the small podium with hands that were steadier than he expected. Looking out at the assembled faces, he saw not the suspicion and fear that had greeted him months ago, but acceptance and respect earned through consistent actions rather than empty promises. I never met David Whitfield, Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. But I've spent the last 6 months learning who he was through the stories his mother tells and the love this community still holds for him. He paused, finding Eleanor in the crowd. She sat in the front row beside Sarah, her hands folded in her lap and her eyes bright with pride. David wanted to paint murals on buildings so people could see beauty on their way to work. He believed art could make the world better, brighter, more hopeful. This scholarship is our way of keeping that vision alive. Marcus's voice grew stronger as he continued. But this fund isn't just about art education. It's about second chances. It's about a community that believes people can change, that past mistakes don't have to define future possibilities. He looked directly at Sarah, remembering the frightened little girl who had watched him come home with blood on his knuckles, and seeing the confident young woman who now called him every day just to check in. 6 months ago, I was a man with no family, no home, no purpose beyond running from my own mistakes. This community, led by Eleanor Whitfield's example, showed me that redemption is possible when people are willing to offer grace instead of judgment. The applause when Marcus finished was warm and sustained. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes, while Eleanor smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose faith in human goodness had been vindicated. The scholarship recipient was Tommy Chen, Meredith's 17-year-old nephew, who had struggled with anger issues and minor legal troubles before finding his passion in sculpture. Marcus saw something of his younger self in the boy's defiant posture and uncertain gratitude. After the ceremony, as people lingered over coffee and Eleanor's famous apple pie, Tommy approached Marcus hesitantly. "Mr. Morrison, I just wanted to say thanks. Not just for the scholarship, but for showing people like me that it's possible to turn things around." Marcus shook the young man's hand, remembering his own desperate need for someone to believe in his potential for change. "Just promise me you'll make the most of this opportunity, son. And remember that the people who care about you are always worth fighting for." Looking around the room at his chosen family and adopted community, Marcus knew he had finally found his way home. 1 year after Marcus first stopped to help Eleanor with her firewood, he found himself in the familiar role of community helper. But this time the situation was different. A young woman sat on the steps of the Cedar Ridge Community Center, her motorcycle parked nearby and her leather jacket marking her as an outsider in much the same way Marcus's vest had marked him. Her name was Riley, and she was 23 years old, with defensive eyes and the kind of rigid posture that came from expecting rejection. She'd been sleeping rough for 3 days, her bike broken down and her money nearly gone. Marcus approached carefully, remembering his own wariness when Eleanor had first offered kindness. "Bike trouble?" Riley looked up suspiciously. "Nothing I can't handle. I'm Marcus," he said, settling onto the steps a respectful distance away. "I work with the youth center here. You look like you could use a meal and maybe a place to clean up. I'm not looking for charity." Marcus smiled, hearing echoes of his own pride in her words. "Good thing I'm not offering charity. I'm offering work. The center needs help with maintenance, and you look like someone who knows her way around tools." Over the following weeks, Riley became a regular fixture at the community center, her mechanical skills proving invaluable for keeping the building's aging systems running. Marcus worked alongside her, sharing stories of his own transformation and listening as she gradually opened up about her past. She had grown up in foster care, aged out of the system at 18 with no family and few prospects. The motorcycle had been her escape, her freedom, but also her isolation. Like Marcus, she'd been running from pain rather than toward anything better. Eleanor, now 74 and moving more slowly but still sharp as ever, took to Riley immediately. She began inviting the young woman for Sunday dinners, teaching her to cook and listening to her dreams of opening her own motorcycle repair shop. "She reminds me of someone I used to know," Eleanor told Marcus as they watched Riley rebuild an engine in the center's workshop. Angry at the world, but hungry for belonging, Sarah, who had officially moved to Missoula and spent most weekends in Cedar Ridge, became Riley's unofficial big sister. She helped her navigate the bureaucracy of getting proper identification and introduced her to the resources available for young adults. Transitioning out of foster care, it's like watching a cycle complete itself. Sarah observed one evening as they sat on Eleanor's porch, watching Riley teach neighborhood kids basic motorcycle maintenance. "You found family here, and now you're helping someone else find theirs." The transformation wasn't immediate or easy. Riley struggled with trust, with accepting help, with believing that people could care about her without wanting something in return. But gradually, surrounded by the same patient love that had changed Marcus, she began to soften. The breakthrough came when Riley's past caught up with her in the form of an abusive ex-boyfriend who tracked her to Cedar Ridge. Marcus found her in the community center workshop at midnight, frantically packing her tools and preparing to run. "He found me," she said without looking up. "I have to go before he causes trouble for everyone here." Marcus thought of his own moment of choice, when his former brothers had come for him and he had decided to stay and fight for the life he was building. "Or you could stay and let us help you deal with it," he suggested. That's what family does. The next morning, when Riley's ex-boyfriend arrived looking for her, he found Sheriff Barnes waiting with a restraining order and the entire community watching. Riley stood beside Marcus and Eleanor on the courthouse steps, no longer alone in facing her demons. 6 months later, Riley opened Morrison's motorcycle repair in a small garage on Main Street. The business loan co-signed by Marcus and Eleanor. The name had been Sarah's suggestion, honoring the man who had shown Riley that family wasn't just about blood, but about choosing to care for each other. Standing in the shop on opening day, watching Riley work on a vintage Harley while Eleanor dispensed advice and Sarah handled the paperwork, Marcus felt the deep satisfaction of a cycle completed. He'd been given a second chance at belonging, and now he was passing that gift forward. The community that had once feared his presence now looked to him as a bridge between their world and the lost souls who wandered through, seeking the same grace he had found in Eleanor's kitchen on a cold autumn morning when everything changed. 2 years after that first autumn morning, Marcus stood in Eleanor's garden, holding a small velvet box that contained matching rings. Not wedding rings, but something more meaningful to both of them. Symbols of a bond that transcended traditional family structures. Eleanor sat on the garden bench that Marcus had built for her the previous spring, watching him with the patient smile that had become as familiar as sunrise. Her walking stick leaned against the bench beside her, hand-carved with new flowers that Riley had added during the long winter evenings they spent together in the workshop. "Are you going to stand there all day, or are you going to ask me?" Eleanor said, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Marcus knelt on one knee in the soft earth between the tomato plants, feeling both ridiculous and profoundly moved. "Eleanor Whitfield, would you do me the honor of letting me be your son?" Her smile was radiant as she extended her hand. "I thought you'd never ask." The rings were simple silver bands engraved with words they had chosen together. Family by choice on Eleanor's, home at last on Marcus's. They had been Sarah's idea, a way to formalize what everyone already knew, that love and commitment came in many forms, and theirs was as real as any bond blessed by law or blood. Sarah emerged from the house carrying a camera. Riley close behind, with a bouquet of wildflowers they had picked that morning. The official ceremony would be small, witnessed only by the people who mattered most, but the celebration would include the entire community. "Ready?" Sarah asked, positioning herself to capture the moment. Marcus slipped the ring onto Eleanor's finger, his hands steady, despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "I promise to honor your wisdom, protect your peace, and love you like the mother you chose to be." Eleanor's voice was clear and strong as she placed his ring. "I promise to guide you with patience, support your growth, and love you like the son I always hoped you could become." They embraced in the garden, where David's memory lived on through painted stones and careful tending, where Eleanor had collapsed 2 years ago, and Marcus had first understood what it meant to be needed by someone who mattered. The celebration that followed filled Eleanor's house and spilled into the yard. The entire community came, bringing food and laughter and the kind of joy that marked significant passages in small towns. Tommy Chen, now in his 2nd year of art school, had created a sculpture for the occasion, 2 trees with intertwined roots, their branches reaching toward shared sky. As evening settled over Cedar Ridge, Marcus found himself on the front porch with Eleanor, watching their chosen family clean up the remnants of the party. Sarah and Riley worked together in the kitchen, their laughter drifting through open windows. Dr. Miller and Sheriff Barnes sat at the picnic table sharing stories and coffee. The community that had once viewed Marcus with suspicion now celebrated his formal adoption into their most beloved family. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that day?" Eleanor asked, her hand resting on his arm. Marcus considered the question, thinking of all the roads not taken, all the chances for connection he had missed over the years. "I try not to." "I might not like the answer. I think you would have found your way eventually," Eleanor said with characteristic wisdom. "Good people usually do, given enough time and enough chances." A motorcycle rumbled past on the main road, its rider heading somewhere unknown. Marcus watched until the taillight disappeared around the bend, remembering the restless searching that had brought him here. He no longer felt the pull of distant highways or the need to outrun his past. He was home, surrounded by family he had chosen and who had chosen him in return. The cycle of kindness that had begun with Eleanor's simple offer of coffee and pie continued through Riley's transformation, through the scholarship fund, through every small act of grace that connected one struggling soul to another. The evening stars emerged one by one over Cedar Ridge. Montana, witnessing the quiet contentment of a man who had finally learned that the best journeys end not with destinations reached, but with hearts opened wide enough to let love in.